if you could continue to pray for them, that's what I'm going to do. Church in East Bethel, Pastor Josh Myers, and I'm happy to announce that it was very successful vote.
Yep.
And so we're going to move forward. And so, yeah, thank you for those of you who were here and voted. We are really excited to partner with them, and we're going to give them everything we've got to help them get on their feet and to, meet the growing population that's going to be out in that area that's going to be growing over the next decade. And so we're really excited to watch them kind of launch into their thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fun to watch them kick off this fall.
Yeah.
Another part of our worship here at Pursuit is the act of giving. If you are new or just visiting, please don't feel any obligation to give. But if Pursuit is your home church and this is a part of your worship, you will find a couple ways on the screen that you can do that. If you have any questions, you can ask Mark or I or any staff member, and we'd love to help you. We're going to trade off.
Okay. So. Apparently, I'm going to now announce the women's ministry gathering, which is happening after service today, so you can hang out. And I think probably if you're a lady and you want to know what's going on, then hang out and hear about it and give some feedback. And
yeah, get involved. There'll be some snacks, so it'll be great.
Yeah. All right.
All right. We have another women's event coming up next Saturday. It is the Mother's Day Tea. If you haven't registered, do that now. Pull your phone out. I won't be offended. But get your name on that list so that you can go to that event. It's going to be super fun. Next Saturday, 10:30 to 12:30 at Hope Christian Church in Shoreview.
Okay.
It's going to be a good time.
And then one more thing to throw on your calendar and on your radar. We are looking to sign up volunteers for our kids club. This is like our version of Vacation Bible School. And so it's exciting for our kids, also exciting for community kids. And it's a really good opportunity. And if there's any way that you can volunteer, and it's not just working with kids, there's all kinds of other volunteer opportunities that go along with it. There's things you can do before and after. There's food that gets, we feed everybody every night. There's a lot of opportunities. So pull out your phone, Kids Club Help, one word, don't let it autocorrect to 94,000 and we'll get you signed up.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. Now it is everybody's favorite time of day. It is question of the day. We do this so that you can't sneak in the back and then leave without having a significant connection with somebody this morning. But I'm an introvert. I get it. It can be a little awkward. So we give you a question to talk about so it's not just say good morning and your name 15 times and forget every name that is said back to you. So our question this morning is, what is your giant, something silly that always seems way harder than it should be?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit, and I tried to find something I have an irrational fear of, because, it kind of goes along with our sermon today. We're talking about David and Goliath. And so I'm going to just throw it out there. I'm a big fan of cooking shows, and one thing I'm absolutely terrified of is the mandolin. I'm convinced that if I go near a mandolin, that I'm going to cut a big slice of my hand off, and I've watched too many people do it. And so I'm even afraid when I open the cabinet and go to pull something else out, if the mandolin's there, I steer around it as best I can and try to make sure I don't go near that thing or touch that thing.
Yeah.
So those of you who don't have a mandolin, you're like, well, that's why I don't have one. I am irrationally afraid of the mandolin, and I will not use it.
Irrational is the right word.
Yes.
Yeah.
It might be wisdom. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm just not cut out for it. So how about you?
Mine is doing my taxes. Every year I get my W-2s in January, and then my brain builds it up to this massive thing. And then finally on the 14th, I'm like, okay, I finally have to do this. And it takes me 20 minutes. And it's so smooth. I don't know why, but every year I'm like, the deadline is tomorrow. I have to do it.
Wait till you find out you can file for an extension and then wait all the way till September.
No, I won't do that. I don't want to do that.
So.
All right, so we are going to give you 4 minutes on the clock. Talk to somebody near you. Talk to somebody you don't know. Talk to somebody. What is your giant, something silly?
Also, if your conversation goes to Star Wars, no one's going to be upset with you. So, yes, there it is.
And when Pastor Mark comes back up, we will move on to the sermon.
was 4 minutes. I know, it goes quickly. Nobody even pays attention anymore. All right. Please continue your conversations when we're done. Hopefully you met a new friend. Yeah. Thanks. There we go. We're continuing on in our series on David. So we're in week 2 here of the life of David. And so about, let's see, many years ago, almost 20 years ago now, I was on a mission trip on the island of Barbados. And it was life-changing, amazing. We were staying on this old plantation that had been turned into a missions base. And from that base, we had basically had all these missionaries who were there. It was a YWAM base, if anyone's familiar with YWAM. And we were staying in these quarters where it was so hot that we had the windows open, and there were no screens on any of the windows. So we often would sleep with mosquito nets because the mosquitoes down there are the size of birds. And horrible. You can't sleep without a mosquito net in that area. And so, middle of the night, I feel something crawling on me. And, it's dark. I don't know what's happening, but I'm in a net, and so the net goes around the bed, and I'm kind of laying there. And, it's so hot, and the net makes the airflow not great, and so you're just kind of laying there. I don't think I had any covers on or anything. Just something was crawling on me, and I woke up to the feeling of what felt like a million little feet kind of walking on my arm on its way to my face. And so, of course, I immediately threw off the insect that was crawling on me, and it just hit the net and bounced back down on top of me. And it was one of the most terrifying. So, I just rolled out of the net and threw the thing that was still on me across the room, flipped the lights on. Everyone was like, "You're a psycho. What is going on here?" And it was a huge millipede, which was creepy crawling up my arm in the middle of the night. And I don't know. I assume that it's deadly. I don't know what it's capable of or what would happen if it actually bit me. But I assumed that would have killed me. Sometimes we have fear that makes sense, and sometimes we have irrational fear. I think I had both in that situation, not knowing what that thing was, assuming that it was going to kill me. My response was intense, but seemed like it was good. And that's the thing about fear sometimes, is that there's like good fear, and then there's like bad fear. There's like a respectfulness of danger. Oftentimes, if you grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of kids, you'd set up the bike jump in the front yard, and everyone would take their turn just flying off the bike jump. And there was always that one kid who was like a daredevil who would just fly off of it and wreck, and it would be horrible. And then there was this another kid who couldn't get up the guts to actually jump off of the ramp, right? And some of you guys are thinking about who you were in that scenario. I was never Evel Knievel. I was never the kid that was going to go flying off of anything. Also, I always felt like I couldn't really get much air anyways because I'm not like a small person. But then we had a kid in our neighborhood who would just basically crack his face open every single time he got a chance. He just didn't seem to have any respect or fear of anything. I think sometimes there are things that we should be afraid of and things that we shouldn't be afraid of. Things that we are rationally afraid of and things that we should have respect for, and then other things that we're afraid of, even though we maybe shouldn't. Fear is one of the most universal human experiences. It shows up in all shapes and sizes. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of losing control, fear of the unknown, fear of any kind of thing, phobia of any kind of thing. Of millipedes is probably a good fear to have. But I think all of us deal with it. It's a universal human emotion and experience. And so today we're going to look at fear, and that fear kind of has a way of sometimes paralyzing us when we are not looking at what's in front of us in the right way. And that's what it did for Israel in today's story. For 40 days, Goliath came down and shouted threats at the army of God, and they stood still, terrified. Every morning, they dressed for battle. They lined up like they were ready, and then they ran away the moment the giant appeared. But faith doesn't look like getting ready for the battle. Faith is stepping out onto the battlefield even when you're afraid, even when you have some healthy fear of what's ahead of you. And that's exactly what David did, and that's what we're going to look at today. David wasn't the strongest. In fact, David wasn't even a soldier. But what set him apart wasn't his strength. It wasn't his abilities. It was his perspective, his obedience, and his confidence in God. And so we're going to look here at 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to motor through a lot of this today because it's about 58 verses long. But just stick with me. We'll get through it. And I know a lot of you are very familiar with the story, but oftentimes we have this picture of these Bible stories that is like at a Sunday school level, and we have some we kind of misremember some of the details of it because some of those details get rounded off when we watch the cartoon version or the VeggieTales version or, whatever the other Christian cartoons that we grew up on. And so allow the scripture this morning to feel fresh and to teach you what is really here. And I think when you look at the details of stories in the Bible, you'll find that they don't exactly add up to what you thought maybe they did add up to. And maybe that this is here, we have this, so that God can show us throughout eternity what he's like and how to handle those giants in our lives that bring us fear. So here's chapter 17, verse 1. Now the Philistines are basically the local enemies of Israel. There's been a lot of skirmishes going on, but now they're coming to this point where there's a battle going to happen between the two main armies of the Philistines and of Israel. So now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soka in Judah. And they pitched camp at Ephes Damim between Soka and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. And so if you are picturing this, there's two sort of hills that come down into a valley, and one army was on one hill and the other army's on the other hill. And I think, if I'm looking at the battle plans here, is that both of them would prefer the other side to start the attack so that way they can fight from a higher position. Not necessarily meet each other right in the middle of the valley, but meet each other on their turf so that way one army has to fight up, which is always going to give them an advantage. And said, the Philistines occupied one hill, the Israelites another, with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. And I don't want to burst your bubble. I know that in some ways of understanding 6 cubits in a span, you've got like a 9.5 foot tall person. That's not unbelievable. We've seen people grow to unbelievable heights. Even in modern days, there's, giantism that people can get sometimes that allows them to grow to a crazy height. I mean, you watch an NBA game and every single person seems like a giant in that. So it's not crazy that this person would have been 9.5 feet, but there's actually some argument, there's some structural things here where in certain versions of the Old Testament, it could be 9.5. In another version of the Old Testament that we have to compare them against each other, one would have him be closer to 6.5, 7 feet. Either way, giant. Think about the average Israelite in that time. 5 foot to 5'3" was about average. So even if they're 7.5 feet or 9.5 feet or 12 feet, I don't know, whatever it is, this was a gigantic, humongous person. I would not want to fight, Nikola Jokic in a fight. I wouldn't want to fight Joel Embiid in a fight, right? Those of you who are basketball fans. Like, very scary person, gigantic, Shaq-like sized figure coming out onto the battlefield and challenging somebody to come and represent Israel's army and fight for them against him. You think Danny DeVito versus Shaq, right? It's just not going to work well for Israel, okay? So a champion named Goliath comes out. He's 6 cubits in a span. He wore a bronze helmet on his head. He wore a coat of armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And on his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. Just like the point alone is like something like 12 pounds, okay? So it's just like, just think giant, scary, heavy armor. This would have been super high technology. This was the Bronze Age. He's wearing all bronze. This would have been like the best armor you could get, and actually for it to be made for him would have been a significant cost and a significant difficult thing to be able to get for a giant like this. This wasn't standard stuff that they made for the army. This was custom stuff made for him, and it was huge. His spear was like a weaver's rod, and the iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let him fight, and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And you can't sort of imagine how intense this would have been to have this giant, fully dressed in bronze armor, ready to go and fight whoever you throw at him. He would have looked terrifying, and it would have definitely caused any person who stepped out on the battlefield to think twice about even taking on the role or the responsibility of fighting for Israel, on behalf of Israel. So I think just to understand that fear keeps us from facing giants, right? If we let fear win in our lives, then it keeps us from moving. It keeps us terrified and still and unable to step out and do the thing that God has called us to do. Goliath had everything. He had size, he had strength, he had weapons, he had experience, he had technology. There was like nothing, there was no problem with him. You looked at him and thought, this is a war-battled warrior who's going to just basically eat up anybody you throw at him. Israel compared Goliath to themselves. They said, hey, here's this giant, and we are kind of smaller people. And they lost before the fight even began. But we're not meant to compare our giants to ourselves. We're meant to compare our giants to God. Israel should have had enough faith to say, here's what God has done for us in the past. He's delivered us from slavery. He's sustained us in the wilderness. He's brought us into this promised land that he gave to us. We've won battles that we had no business winning because God fought for us. All along the way, every step of the way, God was the one who stepped in and fought for us. And so there should have been somebody who remembered that God was the one that fought for them, and that God would sustain them, and that God would win the victory for them, and should have stepped up. But they were terrified, and they were stuck. And I think sometimes when we look at giants in our own lives, we get terrified, and we get stuck. We look at them, we compare them to ourselves, we compare them to our situation, what's available to us, and we're afraid. When in reality, if we look at what God has done and who he is and what he does, we can step out onto the battlefield with faith. This is sort of giving you the vibes of Joshua and Caleb, the spies that went in to check out the promised land before Israel came into the promised land. And of course, they come back, and most of the spies go, hey, there's giants in the land. We're going to get crushed if we go in there. We definitely shouldn't. But of course, Joshua and Caleb were like, yeah, we're good. Let's go. Like they had faith to say, we can beat giants because God is on our side and he's with us. And they were the ones that God honored through the entire process. Joshua and Caleb both had stunning military victories when they came into the land, and both of them were honored through that process of God sort of using them to give the land to Israel. And so the question as we move on here is, what giant in your life has been paralyzing you because you're measuring it by your strength instead of God's? And so that's the problem that they're facing. It says, now David, here's David again. We talked about him last week. He got He met with and was blessed to be the new king of Israel, but he didn't get to step right into that role. He was still just basically operating as a shepherd, kind of biding his time. There was about 20 years from the time that Samuel went to see him and sort of christened him as the new king, and when he actually stepped into that role. And those 20 years were actually really tough years. There were a lot of running and fighting and hiding and being afraid and kind of working through what it looked like. But here's David. So it says, now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening and took his stand. And that is the thing about giants. Giants are relentless until they're controlled, until we face them, until we step out on the battlefield. In fact, if you have fear and you're feeling paralyzed and there's that giant in front of you and you do nothing about it, then that giant just continues to come and wreak havoc in your life. If you ignore it and you stay paralyzed, it just gets bigger and just keeps coming relentlessly to you. Facing it is the beginning of what it looks like to actually see it being controlled and confronted in your life. And that's what we see. For 40 days, the Philistines came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. The army of God stood there, and they were afraid. They were terrified. Giants, they just don't go away on their own. They come back every day unless we face them. And fear tolerated becomes fear reinforced. So if you find yourself in a pattern of fear where you're living in fear of something, if you continue to tolerate that fear, then it just continues to be reinforced and continues to be relentlessly part of your existence. So my question would be, what's been showing up in your life day after day that you've been avoiding instead of confronting in faith? Now Jesse said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. I guess if you're the commander, you get the good cheese. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They're with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up, and set out. And as Jesse had directed him, he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up the lines, facing each other. David left the things with the keeper of the supplies, ran to the battle lines. By the way, that's the job I want in the army. Just let me keep the supplies. You don't want me on the front lines. I'm a lover, not a fighter, okay? So David left the things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brother how they were. As they were talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance. And David heard it. So it's clear that David hadn't really heard this before. It was happening in the morning and in the evening, and he hadn't been there at the time when Goliath was challenging the armies of Israel. And so this is the first time David's really hearing it. And he says, whenever the Israelites saw this man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's perspective is, who the heck does this guy think he is? Does he realize that our God is the one that has brought us through all of this stuff only so we could stand here and cower while he defies the God that we serve? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. And I don't think David even was motivated by getting his daughter in marriage or great wealth or no taxes. That's a good one, right? No taxes. What a tax plan that is, right? Kill a giant, no taxes for the rest of life. And it also extends to the rest of the family. This is amazing. But I don't think these are the things that motivated David in this situation. David was motivated by disgust for how obstinate this person was, standing in front of the armies of God and talking about his God in the way that he was. You know, this sort of thing for David started with obedience and perspective. Those are the things that open the path to victory. Obedience, perspective. Think about what David did before he came here. He listened to his father. He was obedient to what he was told to do. He left the sheep in the care of another person, took care of his responsibilities, brought the stuff down to the line, did what he was supposed to do, gave that to the person. He was obedient, and he had the perspective of someone who was obedient before he found himself in this situation. He obeyed his father. And then he hears Goliath, and he saw that no one else was going to do anything. And he said in disgust, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that they should defy the armies of the living God?" David didn't go looking for a fight, by the way. You don't need to go find giants. No one's asking you to go start a battle with a giant, okay? But also, when you encounter a giant, just in being regularly obedient to the things that you're supposed to do, it's time to go. It's time to step out and time to challenge. But his perspective changed everything. Where others saw a giant, David saw an opportunity to glorify God. So I ask you, sometimes your giant is revealed when you're just doing what you're supposed to do. And the question should be, am I walking in obedience today? Am I being obedient to the things that I'm called to do today? And if I run into a giant, then I'm going to step up and face it. But I'm not going to go looking for a battle. There's no need for him to be looking for a battle. A battle found him, and a battle will find all of us. I think a lot of times people like the idea of having God on their side, and we kind of use God to try to shield ourselves from all the bad things that could potentially happen to us in life. But God doesn't always protect us from difficult things that could possibly come into our life. Jesus straight up tells his disciples and tells us, Paul straight up tells us that we're going to face difficulties and trials and unjust situations and difficult moments in our lives, and that will be part of our experience even when we're being obedient to God. Those things will find you. You don't have to go looking for them. You'll find a giant just in your everyday obedience that you might have to step up and face. And that's what happened here for David. So it says, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness?" Just basically says, dude, shut up. You're so insignificant. All you're doing is taking care of a few lowly sheep. Does everything you can to demean David. I mean, yes, insert joke here about a teenager who might have irrational confidence. I won't insert that joke because I don't want to call out any specific teenagers that might have irrational confidence. But you could see how he would be frustrated, right? David's probably not even old enough to be part of the army. I mean, at this point, we don't exactly know how old David is, but he's most likely he's a younger teenager. And yes, younger teenagers have irrational confidence sometimes and think that, everything's going to be easy and they can do anything. And that could cause someone who knows you very well, especially who's part of your family, to go, "Hey, dude, why don't you back up? The three of us are part of the army. We can take care of this. You need to go back to taking care of the sheep." And Eliab calls him out for it. "Why have you come down here? Whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You come down only to watch the battle." Almost as if to say, you're not really part of this. You're insignificant. We actually don't care that you're disgusted with Goliath. We're trying to deal with it. Get out of the way, kid. Go back to being a shepherd. And for a lot of us in that situation, we would forget about the giant and we'd start fighting with our brother. Okay? But David stays focused on the right battle. He doesn't get sidetracked in fighting with Eliab. It's clear Eliab doesn't even know him. He just said that he was conceited and full of himself. And David is very far from that, as we can see. That yes, he's confident, but he's not confident in his own abilities. He's confident in what God has done in his life. You'll see in just a minute. So it says he turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Instead of fighting with his brother, which would have been easy to do, he keeps his eyes on the real problem. I think a lot of us, we're terrified. We are locked in position. We're afraid to move. And then what we do is we lash out at people around us who are very fallible humans. We talk about that this is the kind of church where you're welcome to be here. Bring whatever you have with you. That this is a church that no one is perfect. We're an imperfect church for imperfect people, and that you're welcome to be here. But when we start fighting with each other and miss the giant that we're supposed to be fighting, we get sucked into the wrong battle. I know a lot of you guys probably have situations like this. You got dysfunctional families that you're dealing with. You got relatives that don't understand who you are, that think one thing about you that's not true. You've got friends who maybe don't think much of you sometimes, and you can get sucked into those battles, being defensive and trying to, fight with someone who you really shouldn't be fighting with. What does he do? He just turns away and stays focused on Goliath. And that's what it takes sometimes to fight these giants, is to not get sucked into all the other battles where we might lash out in our fear and take it out on someone else, which is what I assume Eliab was doing here. But we stay focused on what is ahead of us and what we need to be doing. Eliab questioned David's motives. He attacked his character. David could have gotten sidetracked, but he didn't. And when you're facing a giant, don't get dragged into the side battles. Critics will try to define you, but they don't determine who you are. They don't determine your identity. They don't determine your calling. They don't determine what you're capable of. And so turn away from them. Let the imperfect person be imperfect and keep your eyes on what is really going on here. Don't let distractions, doubts, or even people who know you well put the focus off of what God is asking you to face. And so Saul calls for David. Now, what's interesting is that David's been getting some time in the palace. What we saw just before this section is that Saul's been kind of having a very difficult time, and he's been needing someone to come and soothe him because he's been having a hard time fighting sort of these inner demons that he's been dealing with. And so David had been coming and playing music for him and soothing him. And I don't even know if he had a relationship with David or knew who David was, but David's been in the palace around the king and has been sort of picking up on what's going on and kind of knows the players, and he's been playing music to bring peace to Saul. And so he's like not afraid. He kind of knows what's going on here. And Saul calls for him to kind of come and hear what he has to say. And so Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him." Hey kid, you've got a rational confidence. I don't know if I should send you out to just be torn apart by this giant. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And what's like really unsure here is how well Saul knows David at this point. David knows obviously who Saul is because he's the king, and he's been in the palace and he's been playing music for him. But does Saul really know who David is? And why? Why does Saul send him out? He says, "You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear come and carry off a sheep from the flock, I've gone after it. I've struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I've seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." And so Saul blesses him. But what gives David strength in that moment is all of those times when God has come through in his life for him before this. And I just want to say, if you're having trouble facing a giant, it might be because you don't really have much of a history of allowing God to be faithful to you behind the scenes. Right? Public victories start with private faithfulness. Public victories start with private faithfulness. The Lord who rescued me from the lion and from the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. What does David do? He gives God credit for the times where he's been rescued from dangerous situations in the past, overwhelming odds in the past, and he's seen God show him what to do and guide him through that process and protect him in those situations. David didn't suddenly become brave on the battlefield. His courage was formed when no one was watching. If you want to challenge a giant, it actually looks like a very close relationship with God that you've tended to, worked on, spent time in God's presence, that you prayed through things and seen him come through in small ways, in little victories. By the way, some of us who don't have that history with God, don't have those victories in our lives, you can borrow those from other people, by the way. A lot of you guys are in small groups together, and sometimes those of us who are looking at a giant in the face, and we don't exactly have the faith to draw on, we can share the stories of our lives with other people and give them some faith and some strength in those moments. Right? When you have a person who's maybe lived a little bit longer than you and had a longer relationship with God who can share some of the victories that they've seen in their life with you, it can sometimes give you strength in those moments. Times when we are able to sort of borrow our faithfulness or the faithfulness that we've seen God portray in our own lives. This is why we share stories. This is why we share our testimonies. This is why we encourage one another in those moments, because it's like, hey, borrow some of my faith. I've seen God do this and this and this. He's amazing. He can take you through this. I can walk beside you as you go through it, and I can help. I can be part of your victory in this area. You don't get Goliath faith without sheep pen faith first. And so David's been obedient and faithful in the small things that he's done, and he's seen God win him victories in overwhelming odds, and he's not afraid of the next thing that's up on his plate. So it says, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. And David fastened on the sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. And he said, I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. It must have been hysterical to watch him put on. I mean, Saul was at least a head taller than almost everybody in the army. So this was like a big man's armor on a little man, right? This is a small guy trying to do it. It's just like watching one of your kids put on something that's designed for you. It's funny to watch, right? You just see him kind of like being swallowed up. And David's not going to be able to move. Nothing's going to work if he goes out on the battlefield with somebody else's armor on, especially Saul's armor, who's very tall and very handsome. I don't know what that means, but that's helpful, right? And so he says, no, I can't do this. So what does he take with him? He takes the tools that he's used to, the things that are in his hand already, the things that God used to deliver him from the lion and the bear. He's going to use those very same tools to deliver him from Goliath. The sixth idea here is just to be yourself and use what God gave you. Look down. What's in your hands? What gifts do you have? What things has God put in your hands to be able to fight the battle? It doesn't always have to be on the giant's terms, right? That's kind of the beauty of what's going on here. In fact, if you want to read, there's a book by an author, I cannot think of his name off the top of my head, who just, what is his name? Who just wrote about this and kind of gets into all the crazy scientific possibilities of what this could have looked like. You know, Goliath could have been having trouble with his eyesight. That's why a guy had to lead him out there. Giants have all these problems. This could have been some of the things that would have affected him. David, upset the fight because he went at it from a completely different way. You know, we've seen sort of these David and Goliath moments. In fact, if you watch sports, we've seen sometimes the David defeat the Goliath because they play in a completely different way, right, than the Goliath wants to do. And so we've seen this a lot of times. I always find that it's in college basketball during the tournament where you get this low seed who sticks in a game with a high seed, and they're not supposed to be able to. And it's like, yeah, all they did was shoot threes. It was like a trick. They just basically made these guys come out from the basket, and all of a sudden they were winning the game with 3 minutes left and found a way to beat Goliath, right? So David has kind of some advantages that he uses. But to be perfectly honest with you, these are things that God put in his hands, things that he was familiar with, things that he had used before and watched God deliver him from. And so the question is, what is in your hands? What has God given you to fight these battles? What has God made you amazing at? Stop trying to be somebody else. Fight the battles the way God designed you to fight, with your own story, your own gifts, your own faith, the things that are in your hands. And so it says, meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over, and he saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." He doesn't say I come at you with my sling or my staff. He says, "I come at you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel." This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. And as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and he killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath, which must have been hysterical to watch him pull that thing out. And after he killed him, he cut his head off with the sword. And when the Philistines saw that the hero was dead, they turned and ran. Victory comes when we trust not in the tools, not in ourselves, but in God's power. David makes it very clear, this isn't a battle between you and me. This is a battle between you and my God. I think when we start to see those giants in our lives, not in comparison to ourselves, to our own abilities, to our own strengths, to the things that we can do, but we see them in comparison to how big our God is who fights for us, then we start to have the perspective that David had here now. What does he say? "You come against me with sword and spear. I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." David didn't win because he was brave. He won because he believed God would win the battle. And this is a representational victory. When one person wins, the whole army wins. More on that in just a second. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout, pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath, to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the road to Gath and Ekron. And when the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. And as Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Whose son is this young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I do not know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." And as soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." And when we win those battles against giants, the glory doesn't go to us, it goes to our Father. It goes to the one that we're obedient to. We see Jesus, by the way, represented all throughout this story, right? David has strength to face the giant because he knows God will win the battle. It's a representational battle where all of Israel wins when David wins, kind of like when Jesus wins, we all win. He gives confidence to the entire nation to win the battle. He honors his Father and gives him glory, that Jesus is the greater David. The story isn't just about courage. It's a shadow, it's a picture, it's an example of the gospel for us. Jesus is the true and better David. He stepped onto the battlefield for us so that we didn't have to fight the battle. He fought the giant that we could never beat. He fights sin and death, the giant that we can never beat. His victory becomes our victory. And like David, he gave all the glory to his Father. And so now when you face a giant, you don't face it alone. You face it in the power of the Holy Spirit that's been given to you because Jesus won the victory. The battle belongs to him. You face it with the power of the one who has already overcome and won the battle. And we can also, like I said, we can give confidence to each other. We can share stories of victory with people who need to face a giant. We can borrow some bravery from others who have faced those giants. We can remind each other of how God is great and how he's been active in our lives. And so the question for you is, what is the Goliath in your life? Is it fear? A diagnosis? Some financial difficulty? A relational brokenness? Is it addiction? I mean, pretty much anything that we become addicted to can feel like a giant just taking hold of us, not letting us go, not letting us get out from under that addiction. Is it doubt? You find yourself looking at that giant and just thinking, like, I have too much doubt. I don't know where this is all going, and I'm not sure I believe. Is it comparison? Comparison will kill every piece of your life if you continue to compare yourself to others. Is it shame? Have you done things that you can never forgive yourself for and therefore believe God can't do it either? And then find yourself in a spiral of shame? Whatever it is, it's not bigger than God. It's not. It might seem that way, especially when we're paralyzed in fear. But the moment we step out onto the battlefield and we face it and we compare it to God's power and strength and his victory, it doesn't look so big anymore. And so what do? We step out in faith, bring what we have, trust who he is, and we watch the giants fall. Let me pray to close our time this morning. God, I specifically pray for those of us who find ourselves in fear and paralyzed. Would you give us a new perspective? Not that we would compare our giants to ourselves, to what we're capable of, but that we would compare them to your strength and your victory. And God, would you give us the faith of David that was established by being obedient in the wilderness? Would you show us on a daily basis, in small ways and in big ones, that you are faithful, that you are strong, that you've already won the victory? Would you help us as a community to support each other whenever we step out and face a giant? And God, would you receive glory from all of the victories that we find in our lives? Would you allow us to share those stories with each other and to lend faith and to lend bravery to those of us that need to move and need to step out on the field and need to face those things in our lives? God, don't let us settle for those spiraling situations where we just sit in our shame and our fear, in our doubt, in our comparison. But would you show us what it looks like to face those giants with a supportive community, with you behind us, with your victory as our victory. And God, would you win those battles for us? And would you receive the glory? In your name, amen. Amen and amen. I love you guys. We will see you next week.